Lewis Hamilton has been fired from Ferrari, which means that after the summer break, he will no longer be driving for the Scuderia. Do you want to know the real reason behind his dismissal? Who will take his seat? And which team will become his new home? Stay with me until the very end, because I'm going to tell you everything. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. In an almost unimaginable twist that has detonated like a bomb across the motorsport world, what was once hailed as the union of destiny between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari has collapsed into scandal, acrimony, and disbelief. Only months ago, when Hamilton first stepped into the scarlet overalls and was unveiled as the driver who would restore Maranello's glory, the atmosphere was one of jubilation, of history being written before our very eyes. The Tifosi dreamt of titles, of a resurgence to rival Schumacher's golden era, of Hamilton's legacy intertwining with Ferrari's legend to create something eternal. Yet now, before even a full season has unfolded, that dream lies shattered. Ferrari has terminated Hamilton's contract in the middle of the campaign, during the supposed calm of the summer break, sending shockwaves not only through Italy but across every corner of Formula One's global fanbase. What makes the collapse so extraordinary is not only the speed with which it happened, but the manner in which the breakdown was concealed until the very last moment. For weeks, murmurs began circulating of strain, of growing divisions between Hamilton and the leadership in Maranello. Insiders spoke in whispers of uncomfortable meetings, of tense silences and debriefs, of an atmosphere that had shifted from optimism to unease. Yet few could have predicted the brutality of what was coming, a dismissal, enacted with cold legal precision, that stunned even seasoned figures within the paddock. At the heart of this rupture lies a contract clause buried deep within Hamilton's deal, a performance safeguard inserted by Ferrari's legal department as a hedge against disaster. This clause, little more than a footnote when the signing was first announced, has now become the guillotine that severed the partnership. The requirement was clear but ruthless. By the time the championship paused for its summer interval, Hamilton needed to have achieved a minimum threshold of points. The Scuderia, scarred by the disappointments of previous superstar signings who arrived with fanfare only to stumble, insisted upon this clause as insurance. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. It was a test of value, a guarantee that the enormous financial gamble of bringing in the seven-time champion would not backfire. And yet, despite his pedigree, despite his aura, despite the narrative that surrounded him, Hamilton fell short. His statistics tell a story that Ferrari found intolerable. Fewer points than Charles Leclerc, inconsistent qualifying sessions that left him mired in traffic, races where his pace never reached the levels expected, and a painful absence of victories. For Hamilton, a man accustomed to domination, it was a sobering and humiliating reality. But numbers alone do not capture the full depth of the implosion. Those close to the situation describe the growing rift as cultural as much as it was performance-based. Hamilton arrived at Ferrari determined to impose new ideas, to challenge traditions, to push Maranello into modernity. He submitted confidential reports criticizing the way weekends were managed, the lack of decisiveness on the pit wall, the suffocating weight of Ferrari's bureaucracy. At first, those within the team listened with interest, some even applauded his frankness. Yet over time, resistance hardened. Older figures within the organization, guardians of Ferrari's heritage, began to resent the intrusions of a newcomer. For them, Hamilton's voice was not guidance but disruption, a reminder that he did not trust the institution as it was. That cultural clash deepened with every mistake, every lost podium, every strategic blunder. The critical moment came at Silverstone, where Hamilton had hoped to deliver a statement drive in front of his home fans. Instead, his race dissolved in frustration, tire degradation, questionable pit calls, and a late error that cost him precious points. Ferrari executives, already anxious about the looming performance clause, saw the writing on the wall. By the time the team reached the summer break, the clause had been triggered. Ferrari's lawyers moved swiftly, invoking the contractual mechanism that allowed them to terminate the agreement. The decision was ruthless, executed with corporate efficiency, but it carried an emotional shockwave unlike anything Formula One has seen in years. The fallout has been seismic. Fans of Hamilton, many of whom had followed him into Ferrari believing this would be the crowning chapter of his career, feel betrayed, bewildered, even angry. Social media has erupted with fury, with Tifosi themselves divided between those who believe Ferrari acted pragmatically, and those who feel the team has humiliated itself by discarding the greatest driver of his era in such a brutal fashion. Pundits scramble to analyze how such a high-profile partnership could disintegrate so quickly. Former drivers and experts weigh in with disbelief, calling it a miscalculation of monumental proportions. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere is no less volatile. Hamilton, sources suggest, feels deeply wronged, not only by the invocation of the clause but by what he perceives as a lack of loyalty, a lack of faith. He reportedly reminded Ferrari's leadership that the start of any new partnership is always turbulent, that adjustments take time, that his own years at Mercedes were not instantly glorious but grew into dominance through patience and trust. His arguments fell on deaf ears. Ferrari, eager to shield itself from another cycle of disappointment, chose to cut ties rather than persevere. Now, the paddock is alive with speculation. Where does Hamilton go from here? Retirement looms as a possibility, though those who know him insist he is far too proud to let his career end in this fashion. Some whisper of a sensational return to Mercedes, others dream of a bold move to Red Bull or even a shock signing with Aston Martin. Whatever his next step, one truth is undeniable: this saga has redefined Hamilton's story and Ferrari's legacy. What was meant to be the union of icons has instead become a parable of mistrust, of clashing identities, of ambition undone by impatience. The image of Hamilton walking away from Ferrari during the break, his scarlet overalls now a symbol not of glory but of betrayal, will haunt Formula One for years. It is a reminder that even the greatest legends are vulnerable to the cold calculus of performance, that even the most celebrated partnerships can dissolve in the blink of an eye. For Ferrari, it is a gamble that may yet backfire spectacularly, for in discarding Hamilton they have not only lost a champion but ignited a controversy that will overshadow everything they do for the rest of the season. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Behind the numbers and lap charts, beyond the podium statistics and the dry language of performance analysis, there was something far more volatile brewing inside Maranello, a rupture so deep that it began to consume not only the chemistry of the driver pairing but the very stability of the team itself. The highly anticipated partnership between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, initially promoted as a union of a legendary multiple world champion with Ferrari's young prodigy, quickly deteriorated into one of the most corrosive rivalries seen in a modern Formula One garage. The promise of blending Hamilton's unparalleled experience with Leclerc's raw speed and loyalty to the Scuderia was supposed to spark a golden resurgence. Instead, the collaboration turned toxic almost immediately. What had been marketed as harmony became acrimony, and the clash of philosophies seeped into every corner of Ferrari's structure. Accounts from insiders suggest that during debriefs, tensions were no longer subtle or buried beneath polite language. Exchanges grew sharp, their remarks carrying the weight of veiled hostility. Leclerc, usually composed and diplomatic in front of cameras, reportedly bristled at Hamilton's relentless calls for changes in setup philosophy. Hamilton wanted adjustments that emphasized stability on braking and adaptability across conditions, while Leclerc pushed for sharper front-end response and a style that catered to his aggressive corner entry. Each request contradicted the other, leaving engineers stuck in a loop of confusion, pulled in two directions by drivers unwilling to yield. The more Hamilton insisted on his vision, the more Leclerc felt his own preferences were being sidelined, undermining the environment he had been promised would remain built around him as Ferrari's long-term star. Engineers, caught in this tug-of-war, ended up delivering compromises that satisfied neither, burning weeks of development time on conflicting projects that diluted Ferrari's progress. Leclerc, fiercely protective of his symbolic position as Ferrari's chosen heir, grew bitter. To him, Hamilton was not elevating the garage but destabilizing it, injecting chaos into a system that was already fragile. According to whispers circulating around the paddock, Leclerc went as far as voicing his grievances directly to Ferrari executives and board members, bypassing the usual channels, making it clear that the presence of Hamilton was eroding unity rather than fostering growth. For Leclerc, Hamilton's constant interventions were less the guidance of a veteran and more the overreach of someone determined to reshape the team around himself. In private, he is said to have complained that Ferrari was no longer Ferrari, it was becoming Hamilton's project, a sentiment that only sharpened the divide between them. Adding fuel to the fire was Hamilton's increasingly fraught relationship with team principal Frédéric Vasseur. Initially, Vasseur welcomed Hamilton with open arms. He recognized the strategic advantage of having a seven-time world champion inside the garage and encouraged Hamilton to channel his insights into structured reports, even applauding the infamous memos where Hamilton laid bare his criticisms of Ferrari's internal culture, strategic paralysis, and bureaucratic weight. At first, those memos were hailed as bold contributions, a roadmap to shake the Scuderia out of its stagnation. But as months passed and tangible results failed to appear, those same documents began to look very different. Instead of being interpreted as constructive feedback, they came to be viewed by senior Ferrari figures as indictments, harsh critiques that bordered on accusations. The tone shifted. What once looked visionary now seemed insubordinate. Behind closed doors, senior staff began whispering that Hamilton was overstepping his boundaries. A driver, no matter how decorated, was not meant to dictate cultural change or undermine the authority of leadership. Rumors swirled that Hamilton was trying to run the team from the cockpit, his influence stretching beyond datasheets and setup preferences into the realm of management. To Ferrari's traditionalists, steeped in decades of hierarchy and rigid lines of authority, this was heresy. The image of Hamilton standing in strategy meetings, openly questioning decisions in front of junior staff and senior engineers alike, was received not as constructive challenge but as insubordination. At Mercedes, such directness had been part of the culture. Questioning was encouraged, debates were quick, and efficiency thrived on transparency. At Ferrari, however, that same behavior clashed headlong with a culture that prizes respect for authority, deference to hierarchy, and unity above dissent. The pressure on Vasseur only intensified. Already carrying the weight of expectation from Ferrari's chairman John Elkann and a boardroom that demands progress not only in trophies but in brand prestige, Vasseur began to look visibly strained. The once promising alliance between team principal and star signing began to fracture as disagreements spilled into the open. Sources suggest heated confrontations occurred in meetings, where Hamilton, frustrated by slow or conservative strategies, challenged decisions with a bluntness that stunned those present. His questions were sharp, his tone uncompromising, and his criticism often aired in front of a full room rather than whispered behind closed doors. For Hamilton, it was about demanding accountability in real time. For Vasseur, it was humiliation, an erosion of his authority in front of the very staff he needed to command. What had once been sold as a dream partnership, Leclerc and Hamilton driving Ferrari back to the top, guided by Vasseur's leadership, had morphed into something entirely different, a power struggle on multiple fronts. Hamilton's relentless pursuit of change collided with Leclerc's territorial defense of his status, while his direct style of critique undermined the authority of the team principal who had welcomed him. Instead of unity, Ferrari found itself caught in a storm of competing egos, misaligned philosophies, and political tension that bled into every layer of the organization. The dream of revival was supposed to be built on experience and youth working side by side, on leadership uniting a fractured team, on Hamilton elevating Ferrari to the standard of efficiency he had known at Mercedes. Instead, what emerged was a garage split in two, a principal caught between defending his authority and accommodating his star, and a young driver bitter at having to share the stage with a titan whose very presence overshadowed him. The fracture was no longer beneath the surface. It was open, raw, and growing wider by the day. What happened in Belgium is now being spoken of as the moment that broke the dam, the instant when all the quiet frustrations, whispered doubts, and buried tensions came crashing to the surface. Lewis Hamilton arrived at Spa with expectations of salvaging a season that had already been bruised by inconsistency, internal disarray, and machinery that never seemed to match the lofty promises made when he first signed with Ferrari. But instead of redemption, the weekend unraveled. A costly spin during qualifying left him starting farther back than anticipated, and what followed in the race was a subdued performance that yielded fewer points than the Scuderia desperately needed to remain in contention. Outwardly, Ferrari tried to mask the disappointment, but insiders now reveal that behind closed doors, the leadership had already reached its conclusion. The contractual clauses in Hamilton's deal were strict, filled with benchmarks and performance triggers that were as unforgiving as they were clear. By Sunday night, the tone inside Maranello had shifted. Lawyers were quietly brought into the conversation, and what had once been considered a long-term partnership between a seven-time world champion and the most storied team in Formula One was suddenly teetering on the edge of collapse. When the summer break arrived, Hamilton was summoned to Ferrari's headquarters in Maranello under the guise of a routine debrief. What awaited him was anything but ordinary. According to those with knowledge of the encounter, the meeting lasted less than half an hour, yet its impact will reverberate through Formula One history. Hamilton was presented with termination papers, a document that made it clear the team no longer saw him as part of their vision. The champion, blindsided and visibly frustrated, reportedly challenged the decision. He argued with conviction that he had been handed machinery unworthy of his skill, insisting that no driver on the grid could have achieved more with the limitations of the car he had been given. He pressed the point that the promises made to him when he joined the team had been broken, that Ferrari had failed as much as he had. The response from Ferrari's management was described as clinical, detached, and unwavering. They pointed to the contract, the thresholds, the data, the points table, and finally declared that the results spoke louder than any justification. Hamilton left the factory gates no longer a Ferrari driver, his tenure with the prancing horse cut short in the most abrupt and brutal fashion imaginable. The news spread like wildfire, racing through the paddock faster than any car could on track. Journalists scrambled, fans erupted across social media, and rival teams immediately began calculating the potential consequences of the fallout. Yet what truly electrified the entire motorsport community were not just the headlines of Hamilton's dismissal, but the rumors that surfaced almost immediately afterward. Barely 2 days had passed before eyewitness accounts began to surface. Hamilton had been spotted in Monaco, entering a discreet hotel where none other than Toto Wolff, his longtime ally mentor, and the man who had overseen his most dominant years at Mercedes, was staying. The sighting triggered a frenzy of speculation. Reports claimed that Hamilton and Wolff spent hours behind closed doors, engaged in conversations described as intense, private, and forward-looking. The mere idea of a reunion between the two, after everything they had achieved together, was enough to set the paddock ablaze with anticipation. For Mercedes, the timing of such discussions would appear contradictory on the surface. The team has long emphasized their commitment to George Russell, a driver they view as the cornerstone of their next era, while also cultivating the meteoric rise of Andrea Kimi Antonelli, their prodigious junior talent seen by many as the sport's future. Yet the prospect of Hamilton's return cannot be dismissed so easily. Beyond the numbers, beyond the contracts, beyond the logical structures of succession planning, there exists the emotional weight of unfinished business. Hamilton achieved his greatest triumphs in silver, not red. His legacy is intertwined with the dominance of Mercedes in the turbo-hybrid era, and the bond between him and Wolff transcends the typical driver-boss relationship. It is built on trust, loyalty, and an understanding forged through the fires of championship battles. The possibility of a comeback carries an almost mythical quality. For Wolff, bringing Hamilton back would not simply be a sporting decision, it would be a statement, a declaration that Mercedes remains unafraid to embrace drama, risk, and narrative in pursuit of glory. For Hamilton, the allure is undeniable. To close his career at the team where he became a legend, where he shattered records and defied expectations, could be the ultimate act of legacy building. Those close to him suggest that he feels robbed by how his time at Ferrari ended, left unsatisfied by machinery that never lived up to his standards. A return to Mercedes offers him not only competitive potential but also emotional closure, the chance to write his final chapters on his own terms rather than being discarded at a boardroom table in Maranello. Whispers now ripple through the paddock about what such a move would mean. Would Russell accept the dynamic of sharing the garage once again with Hamilton, knowing how much influence the veteran still commands? Would Antonelli's path to Formula One be delayed, reshaped, or even jeopardized by the sudden reappearance of a titan reclaiming his seat? Would Ferrari regret the decision, realizing too late that letting go of Hamilton created a void they could not easily fill? The speculation has become relentless, filling headlines, podcasts, and debates with questions that have no easy answers. Fans are split between disbelief and excitement, some insisting that Hamilton deserves a triumphant return, others arguing that the sport should be looking to the future, not the past. Yet perhaps the most captivating element of this entire drama is its unpredictability. Formula One thrives on tension, on rivalries, on seismic shifts that redefine eras. The sight of Hamilton leaving Maranello in silence, only to reappear days later in hushed conversations with the one man who knows him best, embodies everything that makes the sport more than just racing. It is politics, theater, and raw human emotion intertwined with speed, engineering, and history. What seemed impossible a week ago now feels tantalizingly plausible. In the end, whether Hamilton and Wolff craft one last masterpiece together or whether the rumors fade into legend, the world is left captivated, waiting, and unable to look away from a saga that could change the course of Formula One forever. Speculation in Formula One always moves like wildfire, but the rumors swirling around Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton are unlike anything the sport has seen in years. Already, insiders whisper that Toto Wolff is not only keeping the door open but actively exploring ingenious contractual frameworks that could bring the seven-time world champion back to Brackley. The most talked-about possibility is a one-year comeback agreement, carefully timed to sync with Mercedes' ambitious preparations for the radical regulation changes set to arrive in 2026. This would be no ordinary reunion, it would be a symbolic and strategic masterstroke, one that combines nostalgia, spectacle, and forward planning all at once. For Mercedes, the return of Hamilton would mean more than lap times. It would mean injecting a surge of morale into a factory that has felt the sting of decline, galvanizing engineers, mechanics, and strategists who once thrived on the Hamilton-Mercedes golden era. It would also give Kimi Antonelli, the prodigy they are grooming for the long term, more space and time to develop without being crushed under immediate expectations. For Hamilton himself, such a move would carry profound emotional weight. His Ferrari adventure, so loudly heralded as a fairy tale revival, now risks being remembered as a bitter disappointment. A comeback with Mercedes would give him the chance to reclaim the narrative of his career, to ensure his legacy is defined not by rejection or acrimony, but by redemption on his own terms. It would allow him to step back into the cockpit of a machine built by the team that knows him best, to chase podiums and victories not out of desperation but out of defiance, and to walk away from Formula One when he chooses, not when he is pushed aside. The symbolism is powerful. Hamilton, the champion who defined an era, returning to the team that helped him carve history, and leaving the sport as an icon rather than as a casualty of politics and miscalculation. But while Mercedes contemplates this bold maneuver, the fallout at Ferrari grows messier by the day. Officially, the Scuderia's communications department released a sterile statement, full of vague phrases about mutual agreement and differences in sporting vision. Yet anyone with even a passing understanding of Formula One politics knows such words are little more than smoke. Behind closed doors, the rupture has detonated like a bomb inside Maranello. Sponsors who poured vast sums into marketing campaigns built around the image of Hamilton in Ferrari red are reportedly livid. Multi-year advertising strategies, promotional tours, and brand narratives have been shattered overnight, leaving executives scrambling to salvage investments that now seem like wasted millions. The fans, too, are seething. For months, they dreamed of a revival of Ferrari's golden heritage, of Hamilton echoing Michael Schumacher's legendary rebirth in Scarlet, of history being rewritten in front of their eyes. Instead, those dreams have been crushed under the weight of political maneuvering and fractured relationships. Social media has become a battlefield, flooded with hashtags denouncing Ferrari's leadership, calling the split disgraceful, demanding accountability, and accusing the team of betraying not only Hamilton but also the tifosi worldwide. The sense of betrayal is palpable, as if an entire generation of Ferrari supporters had been promised magic and handed ashes instead. Inside the team, however, the atmosphere is far more complex. While the public backlash rages, there is a current of grim relief running through the corridors of Maranello. Charles Leclerc has quietly reasserted himself as the team's undisputed centerpiece, no longer forced to share the spotlight with a superstar who threatened his primacy. The internal power struggle that simmered all season has ended decisively, restoring clarity to Ferrari's driver hierarchy. For team principal Frédéric Vasseur, the decision, painful as it may be, represents a consolidation of authority. He has stamped his vision firmly onto the project, signaling to both staff and drivers that Ferrari's direction will no longer be bent to accommodate the desires of a single superstar, no matter how legendary his name. Yet whether this internal consolidation translates into performance on the track remains an unanswered question. Leclerc may now hold the team in the palm of his hand, but Ferrari's problems extend far beyond driver dynamics. Their development program has been plagued by inconsistency, their strategy calls have often veered into chaos, and their ability to execute under pressure remains fragile. The hope is that a simplified hierarchy and a united vision will produce the stability needed to challenge Red Bull, Mercedes, and McLaren in the coming seasons. The fear, whispered even by insiders, is that the loss of Hamilton's experience and aura will leave Ferrari diminished in ways they do not yet comprehend. Meanwhile, the broader paddock watches with fascination, knowing that these intertwined narratives, Hamilton's possible return to Mercedes and Ferrari's internal recalibration, could reshape the balance of power in Formula One. For Mercedes, the stakes are monumental. Bringing Hamilton back could reignite the fire in Brackley, restore their image as a driver's team, and prepare them for a seamless handover to Antonelli once the 2026 era begins. For Hamilton, the chance at redemption is irresistible, an opportunity to prove once again that he decides how his story ends. And for Ferrari, the aftermath of this rupture could either solidify their long-term vision under Leclerc and Vasseur or condemn them to years of instability, haunted by the ghosts of promises they failed to keep. The drama is more than sporting. It is human, emotional, political, and symbolic. Hamilton's possible return to Mercedes would not just be a contract, it would be a statement, a rewriting of history, a defiant final chapter in one of Formula One's greatest sagas. Ferrari's fracture is not just about a lost partnership, It is about broken dreams, fractured trust, and the eternal struggle of a team that oscillates between glory and chaos. And as these narratives collide, the sport once again reminds us why it is more than a competition of machines. Formula One is a theater of ambition, betrayal, redemption, and reinvention, where legends are made, legacies are broken, and history is rewritten not in years but in moments that leave the world breathless. As the dust settles, the story of Lewis Hamilton finds itself at a point no one could have predicted, a moment where triumph and turmoil intersect with brutal force. His legacy, carved in stone after more than a decade of rewriting Formula One history, remains beyond dispute. He is a 7-time world champion, the man who equaled and surpassed records once thought untouchable, a driver whose name will forever echo alongside the greatest of all time. Yet despite that unshakable place in the pantheon of the sport, his future suddenly feels precarious, fragile in a way that shocks even the most cynical observers. The image of Hamilton, stripped of his Ferrari contract, leaving Maranello with pride battered and eyes clouded in uncertainty, is one of the most surreal sights Formula One has witnessed in recent memory. It has transformed the summer break from a traditionally quiet interlude into a theater of chaos, speculation, and endless intrigue, with every headline, every rumor, every whispered conversation in the paddock orbiting around a single question: what now for Lewis Hamilton? For Mercedes, the decision that looms is monumental, one that could alter not only the trajectory of their team but the very narrative of the sport. Do they open their doors once again to the man who brought them years of unprecedented dominance, the icon who defined their golden era? Would welcoming him back inject fresh energy into Brackley, reigniting a spark of belief among engineers, mechanics, and fans who still chant his name with devotion? Or would it risk destabilizing the carefully constructed dynamic with George Russell, a driver younger, hungrier, and long envisioned as the face of Mercedes' future? The stakes are colossal, because to bring Hamilton back is not simply to sign a driver, it is to embrace the return of a force of nature, a competitor who thrives on rewriting expectations but who also carries with him the weight of drama, controversy, and pressure that could test the resilience of any team. Meanwhile, rival outfits across the grid cannot help but watch this unfolding saga with hungry eyes. For years, teams like Red Bull, Aston Martin, and even Audi's incoming project have dreamed of securing a star of Hamilton's caliber, a driver who instantly elevates the profile, the confidence, and the commercial power of any organization he touches. To have Hamilton suddenly available, wounded yet defiant, is a temptation that cannot be ignored. Could an ambitious outsider throw their hat into the ring, offering him a platform to prove, once again, that age is just a number and greatness never fades? The prospect alone has sparked a frenzy of speculation, with journalists and fans dissecting every clue, every handshake, every cryptic social media post for signs of where Hamilton might land next. And then there is the darker possibility, the one few dare to voice aloud but which lurks at the edge of every discussion. Could this brutal divorce with Ferrari push Hamilton toward the unthinkable? Could he, faced with rejection from the most storied team in motorsport, decide that the time has come to walk away entirely from Formula One? The image of Hamilton stepping out of the sport not with the glory of a final title, but with the bitterness of unfinished business, is almost too much to contemplate. It would be an exit unlike any other, abrupt, shocking, and filled with unanswered questions. For his fans, it would be heartbreak. For the sport itself, it would be the loss of one of its greatest showmen, a competitor whose presence on the grid elevates every race, every rivalry, every narrative. The truth is that no matter which path unfolds, whether a sensational return to Mercedes, a daring leap to a new challenger, or the ultimate farewell, the ripple effects will be seismic. Ferrari's decision to cut ties has already sparked debate about whether this was an act of courage, a bold statement of accountability to their tifosi, or a catastrophic blunder that will haunt them for generations. Did they rid themselves of a disruptive force at the cost of alienating millions of fans? Or did they squander the influence of a champion who might have restructured the team from within, even if he never delivered a title in red? The judgment will not come overnight. It will play out across seasons, across championships, across the evolving legacies of Hamilton, Ferrari, and whichever team dares to gamble on him next. As for Hamilton himself, the summer break has become a crucible, a period not of rest and reflection but of decision and reinvention. While others recharge, he finds himself at the center of a storm that may define the final chapters of his career. Every option before him carries both promise and peril. Returning to Mercedes could be the fairy tale reunion fans dream of, a chance to rewrite history and perhaps even close his journey with the team that made him a dynasty. Venturing into new territory could prove his adaptability once more, showing that even in his 40s, his hunger and talent remain sharp enough to conquer fresh challenges. And walking away, though painful, could cement his legacy as a man who chose to step aside on his own terms, refusing to fade into decline. What is undeniable is that Formula One has been thrown into an unprecedented state of suspense. The sudden implosion of Hamilton's Ferrari adventure has not just created a vacancy in Maranello, it has created a vacuum in the entire sport, one that every team, every fan, every insider is scrambling to interpret. The sense of unpredictability is electric, and for a championship that thrives on narratives as much as it does on lap times, this may be the most gripping storyline of the decade. Hamilton, Ferrari, and Mercedes now stand at the crossroads of fate, and whichever direction is taken will not simply change the standings, it will reshape the identity of Formula One itself for years to come.